There have been claims that the spruce used by Antonio Stradivari and Joseph Guarneri grew during a little ice age, and that it gave the wood narrower grain and better acoustical properties. And that's why no one else has been able to produce such wonderful instruments. And of course, like so many other myths about violin making, the claim is false. Yes, there was a mini ice age throughout most of Europe during the time of Stradivarius and Guarnerius, yet it has very little, if anything, to do with the success of their instruments. In fact, in so many cases, they both chose the wood least affected by the little ice age to create their finest concert instruments. Like so many things about master violins, you must look at the entire picture to discover the truth. You can't base your conclusions upon just one or two Stradivarius or Guarnerius that happen to be accessible. You must look at all of their violins collectively, and then focus your attention on the ones that have been loved and performed on by the greatest violinists throughout history, since those are the ones that have established Stradivarius and Guarnerius as the greatest of all violin makers. My own journey down this path started when I was still a teenager, and after a few years of measuring and playing upon the master's instruments, my eyes were truly opened by Herbert Goodkind and his violin iconography of Antonio Stradivari. I had spent months in museums and private collections around the world, yet I was amazed at how blind I'd been, and it only took a few pages to dispel the myth and toss the old fable to the wind. I was shocked at the time, and I know that it must sound strange to most musicians, but as a violin maker, it actually felt like a breath of fresh air to set the instruments aside for a while and study hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs, one after the other, without all the emotions and, yes, sometimes even the magic of seeing and playing upon the instruments themselves. What the myth is referring to more than anything is the width of the grain. The warmer and wetter the climate, the wider the grains will grow. Traditionally, the finest and most valuable trees for making concert violins are the ones that grow the most consistently. And since the wood for the belly of a fine violin is almost always opened like a book and made in two pieces, this results with fine, narrow grain in the center of the violin and a medium width of grain toward the edges. And for the most part, the finer the winter growth, the better. Surprisingly, even though Guarnerius lived most of his life in poverty, he was the one who almost always used the highest quality spruce, while Stradivarius, as wealthy as he was, used his vast amount of experience over the years to compensate for using pretty much whatever he had on hand. Don't get me wrong. Stradivarius' lowest quality spruce was better than most modern makers ever see in their lifetime. He just wasn't as concerned as Guarnerius was, yet he succeeded brilliantly in making instruments that could satisfy almost any customer. Yes, Stradivarius made quite a few master violins with superfine grain in the center, yet more often than not, his finest concert instruments, like Guarnerius, had the much sought-after consistent growth, with moderately narrow grain in the center and medium-width grain at the edges, which was not typical of the trees during the Little Ice Age. Yet, This is the type of wood that Joseph Guarneri chose almost every last time. All throughout his long career, Stradivarius also made numerous instruments that had wide grain, inconsistent grain, backwards grain, and even a few one-piece bellies, with the grain varying from narrow to wide across the entire width. And for the most part, even these trees that broke the rules became masterpieces in the hands of the master. As long as the winter growth was relatively fine, if it was well cured, and for dreamers like me, if the tree had a soul. Oh, this is shameless. Yet the trees that make master violins truly are wonderful, and they do have souls. Yet the finest quality with the narrow winter growth that can produce such sweet, powerful voices like those of Stradivarius and Guarnerius have always been extremely rare. So rare, in fact, that there are those throughout history who have spent their entire lives in vain searching for them. And even after the trees are found, it takes another 10 to 15 years to cure the wood properly and prepare it for its life as a master violin. I never met the man, but I was told by his widow that he began his search for this tree in 1927 and finally discovered it in the summer of 1953. Even though he was very old, he waited for the deep snow of winter and cut it down, January 1954. He split the pieces, waxed the ends, and died soon after. I purchased his entire collection, and there are pieces with much finer grain than this. And for those customers who believe that the Little Ice Age really is the secret, those pieces will make the finest violins for them. The secret is that the finest spruce still grows. But that's not the real secret.